Hello and welcome to Politics. On today's programme, we're going to be having a look at the first few weeks of François Hollande's presidency, the man, the promises, how he'll be able to keep them now that he's in the Élysée Palace. We've had a glimpse of how things were beginning to go in the last few weeks. I'm joined here on the set by Christian Macarian, who's the managing editor at L'Express, also by Craig Kopitas, senior writer at Bloomberg News, and by Christian Mallard, who is the foreign affairs editor at France 3. Thanks very much indeed to all of us for being here. Craig Kopitas, first of all, we heard all these campaign promises, and because François Hollande is something of an unknown quantity, even here in France, he'd never held elected office and so on and so forth. We're discovering the man as president and getting a glimpse into how he intends to keep some of those fairly impressive promises.
Yeah, and statistically, the most important statistic that shows I think people are behind his ideas, the most recent poll that shows 61% of those polled think he's already doing a great job and are very supportive of him. He's juggling. He only really needed to juggle one thing, which was the economy. There's a lot of problems with that, but he's also decided to start juggling foreign policy, which I find to be the most fascinating thing, particularly his statement on Syria. That he thinks that French troops should go in. And I have to say, I found that exciting and bold for one reason, because the French were last in Syria in 1860 when Napoleon III was in charge. And they went in with 6,000 troops to save Christians who were being murdered by essentially Syrians. Now, what was fascinating about that all those years ago, and I know Hollande must be aware of this, is the French were invited in by the Ottomans to go in and clean this up. And they did it. And they did it fairly effectively. And I've always felt if there's going to be a Syrian solution that gets rid of this thug Assad, it's going to have to come from Turkey. So I'm really curious to see if Monsieur Hollande now goes to Istanbul for discussions there.
Christian Mallard, we have heard in the last few days a great deal about Syria. We've heard about withdrawal from Afghanistan, which we'll talk about in a moment. But this harder and harder line, it seems, on Syria. The statements coming from both François Hollande and Laurent Fabius have been bold.
Yes, but at the same time, there are contradictions, because yesterday, when President Hollande talked to our colleagues of France too, starting saying that he is for military option, which is possible, but in the frame of the UN Security Council. For me, it doesn't mean anything, because already we know that there won't be any military intervention, all the more so as we have the Russians saying no, and the Chinese saying no too. So where are we going? Nowhere. No. The situation showed that how powerless the Western world is, the Arab League, the UN. We have to change the rule of the Security Council. As long as you have one country putting his veto, everything is blocked. Come on, it's becoming nonsense. It's time to wake up, change all this at the UN.
Christian Macarian, so it's all bluster in a sense. What François Hollande is saying on Syria, there's no depth to it, no seriousness to it. Do you agree?
I totally agree. Well, I don't have exactly the same reading as my colleagues of Mr. Hollande's statement yesterday. I think it was more awkwardness than something very smart of him. The fact that he used the uncommon word deliberation of the UN instead of resolution, for instance, shows that he's still unexperienced in this matter. So he wanted to say, that's my interpretation, that we don't close the doors, okay? If you ask me the question about a military solution, I would not say no, which doesn't mean that he says yes, because he knows perfectly that we are absolutely unable to do something like that. Not only because of the Russians and of their position inside the Security Council, but also because militarily, this operation would be absolutely incredible, impossible. And the fact that we have a history with Syria is very ambiguous, because, as you know, and you made a very interesting historical remembrance. I think it's very important. But in 2021, 22 to 23, the French went back to Syria under the mandate of the Society of Nations. While the Brits had Iraq and Palestine. It was more or less the result of the Sykes-Picot agreements. When General Gouraud took the power in Damascus, he went immediately to the mosque of the Umayyads, and he kneeled in front of Saladin's tomb. And what did he say? Saladin, wake up, we are back. He wanted to say, we, the Crusaders, we, the French, and so on. Well, that's a popular and historical French fantasy. There is something about Syria, but we are not able to do anything.
Any more than
I
the previous
totally
government?
agree with what Greg said previously, but when the French are very preoccupied today with the situation of the Christians in Lebanon, but also in Syria. And when you talk to the Christian in Syria, the Christian community in Syria, these people today are very afraid of the post-Bashar era to know what is it going to look like without Bashar? What would happen? And I think the French are very scared of the fact that they think that the Muslim Brotherhood would come back, or Salafist or Islamist, as we had in Tunisia, in Libya, everywhere. So they are very
Well,
scared.
I must side with Monsieur Hollande on this and the word deliberation. He's put himself out on a limb with this. And so let's give him a chance to see if he falls off the limb or can make this work. And I think the sign of it working, if he wasn't just blustering, is if he sits down with the Turks. Because remember, what France, it's a long time ago, but as I don't need to tell you gentlemen how important history is in this country. And the fact of the matter is, it was the French who all those years ago, they were the only ones who actually brokered a treaty of peace between the murderers and the survivors. And they did it, they somehow were able to broker this deal with the help of the Turks. And by the way, the powers of the time, the British Empire, etc., let's call the British Empire the UN of the day, they didn't want the French there. There was a lot of trying to keep them out. So I think let's give Hollande a few more days on Syria.
But you said about Turkey. I remember having met just 2 days before Hollande's victory, Monsieur Moscovici, who thought he would probably be the next Secretary of Foreign Affairs, which he's not. And we talked about Turkey. I said, is Turkey? He said, no, Turkey is not, quote, but things have changed, we are fabulous now, is not on the agenda, and there is no way we are going to move forward with Turkey as long as they don't acknowledge the slaughtering of the Armenian in 1915. So I don't see how we are going to move with Turkey.
Going back, Christian Macarian, to the point that was made a moment ago about François Hollande having gone out on a limb. In a sense, what's so interesting right now, moving on from Syria to some of the other issues, is this political novice in many respects, unknown, largely outside of France, being tested after 17 years out of power for the socialists, on a number of different fronts. Promises will have been made, engagements will have been taken, expectations will have been raised, and now suddenly he's having to deliver as a political novice. It's going to be a fascinating time, but for him, incredibly dangerous.
That's right. And from my point of view, he tried to make a mixture of the traditional French policy towards Syria and something new. He wanted to show more determination, keeping the line of his predecessors. But there is something that I think we must add. Mr. Juppé, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, was a Chirac boy. So he was on the Chirac line, extremely tough against Syria. And that's why, from my point of view, we have lost time with the Russians. We have lost a lot of time thinking that there was absolutely nothing to do with the Syrians. One thing important is that Hollande is going to meet in 2 days Vladimir Putin here in Paris. So something could happen here. If there is a solution for Syria, it's not in Damascus, it's not in a military expedition, it's in a new language with the Kremlin. And the key point is there. Is Hollande, so let's give Hollande more time. Let's be honest. If Hollande finds a new way of discussion with the Russians, that could be honestly interesting, because it was not the case with the former regime.
I totally agree with Christian, and at the same time, let me add this. I think the meeting, the dinner, working dinner between Holland and Putin would be interesting. But the key is the meeting between Obama and Putin. You know that Putin boycotted, let's put it this way, or sent Medvedev, but anyway, the G8 and NATO summit. And why would not imagine that Putin might come strong on the table and say to these people, Obama, Holland, and the allies, and say, listen, guys, I'm so fed up with your story of missile shields in Poland and Czechia, which I agree with him on that. And why don't you stop this game with me on that? And at the same time, I would be more efficient maybe on Syria and Iran. It might be part of the game of the discussions. I wouldn't be surprised.
We've been talking an awful lot these last few days, of course, about Afghanistan. François Hollande made his flying visit to the place and seems to be looking for this middle way, satisfying his campaign promise of getting the troops out whilst leaving some troops in, because logistically it simply can't be done. It seems to be the tack that he's taking. He's made these promises. He's making a big effort to stay true to them. But there are the factual difficulties of getting the things up and running.
Well, yeah, there's not enough planes to take everyone out who wants to leave. That's the problem. I think I get the impression that Hollande would like to leave tomorrow, as well he should, if he could get the troops out of there. But, you know, he's got, we mentioned Syria, you mentioned Afghanistan. Well, you know, he has another third serious foreign policy issue on the table that he seems to be attacking head on. One that for the French establishment, what I call the French Imperium, is really going to upset them. And that's this situation in Francafrique, where he met, Monsieur Hollande met the other day with Boni Yaya, the head of the African Union, you know, the African Union boss. And there seems to be talk at the palace, France will no longer support these corrupt French-speaking African dictators / elected presidents. Now, a lot of people, you know, that might not resonate outside of maybe 500 people in France, what I just said. It's like, oh, French-speaking Africa, who cares about that? But it's very important for France, and Francafrique, as you gentlemen know better than anyone, has been a cornerstone not only of French foreign policy, but a cornerstone of continuing the French Imperium. And on the other side of that, there's a lot of jobs that are connected with that. And Hollande right now is looking at some 46 French companies laying off more than 90,000 workers over the next few months. So he is juggling a lot of things at once.
As luck would have it, in fact, Monsieur Boni Yaya is in the next studio being interviewed as we speak. But indeed, that would represent a huge upset, change, transformation to France's political establishment before we even talk about the impact it would have in West Africa, say.
Well, I would like to be a little bit more honest with Nicolas Sarkozy. It's not because he has gone that, you know, he did nothing for 5 years. Sarkozy made a significant change in Francafrique, in the French-speaking.
Well, he began by upsetting a lot of people.
Yes, but he did something extremely important in Ivory Coast with this kind of comeback of democracy, sponsored by the UN at a very high price. We know that. And he said that everybody quotes the Dakar speech that was really awkward, but he said that the French will never help again interfere in African self-government or national governments. So this point is not new from Mr. Hollande, but it's a development, and he's right. He's absolutely right to.
Can I interject something
yes,
here?
Of course.
You see, what Mr. Sarkozy did was he admitted that Africa was France's heroin problem, and he tried to get it on methadone. And I think what Sarkozy is trying to do is get off the methadone program, which is methadone is heroin by the same, you know, just under a different name. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's going on here. I mean, again, it's another limb that Monsieur Hollande has climbed out on here, which leaves him very vulnerable for folks like us to sit here.
Ambitious but exposed.
But for a socialist president, I think it's time that Hollande decides and acts in the way to say, we stop backing all these corrupted heads of states.
Which is impossible.
Which is impossible, yeah.
Which is impossible.
And let me finish. And have their people share the dividends of their natural richnesses. I may be dreaming for better housing, better jobs, and it's time. If
The
not,
social justice is
yes,
the way
Christian
forward.
is
We
right
are
saying it's
cynical.
impossible, but
we
he has
are,
to try.
We are cynical. We are going to say it's impossible. You know, if Francois Hollande thinks that it's possible, well, bless his heart and good luck to him.
Now,
And
if he wants to be a true socialist, he has to know, and he knows that by heart, because he was my professor at school, so I remember
really?
his lessons quite well. He was a very honest and very clever man.
Straightforward.
Well, if you want to change something in the relationship between France and the African countries, former colonies,
Right.
you have to help development, economic
sure.
and social development.
Exactly.
So for a socialist, if you want to show your difference, you must show your difference in development aid and different kinds of help. And that's where I am waiting for him, personally. Another point is that I think we have talked about Afghanistan, Syria, and now Africa. There is a common notion for Hollande on all these questions. Hollande is looking for a Hollande line. And he needs to show that he opens a new way for our foreign policy. And of course, we are at the beginning of the process, and it's very complicated. It's very confused for the moment.
I
Very
don't know if
quickly.
we will have a Holland line in the Sahel region, but for having chatted on and off the record yesterday with Laurent Fabius, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, what I know is that they feel powerless and appalled by the development of the situation from Mali to Niger, Mauritania, and they hope that Algeria might play a bigger role in the area to try to stabilize the area, because right now it's not going to be stabilized. It's the worst is coming. The worst is up.
Like for Syria, the key point is Moscow. The key point
Yeah, sure.
for Sahel is
Algeria.
Algiers, always.
Exactly.
And because Algeria doesn't play its role in the Sahel region, we
agree.
all know that.
That's
So
right.
on all the issues then we've touched upon, we've seen a hint of difference. Remains to be seen what actually he can change for real. I hope you'll come back and discuss that with us over the coming weeks. Sadly, we're out of time for today. Thanks very much to all of you for being
Thanks,
with us.
Melissa.
Thanks for watching. We'll be back very soon for another edition of Politics. Do stay with us.